Okay, so this workshop is being recorded. So welcome to the Clean Marina Fall Program Workshop. As I said, I'm Teresa Qualls and I'm the Wisconsin Clean Marina Program Coordinator. So first, I'd just like to briefly acknowledge our supporters. So I work for the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant, and our primary funding source comes from the Fund for Lake Michigan. And we have additional support from the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program, the Wisconsin Marine Association, and the Wisconsin DNR. Okay, so before we get started, I'd like to just give a few Zoom reminders. So if you need any technical assistance, please use the chat box. And if you have any questions, we will have time for questions at the end of each presentation, as well as at the end of the workshop. So just use the chat box, or you may raise your hand. We also ask that you mute yourselves. And in addition, please add your name and affiliation in the chat box so that lets everybody know who is on the workshop today. Okay, so I'm just going to go through our workshop agenda for this afternoon. So we'll start with a welcome from the Wisconsin Marine Association, and then I'll be giving an overview of the Wisconsin Clean Marina Program, provide some updates, and then announce all of our new certifications, recertifications, and pledges that have occurred in the past year. And then we'll have a series of 3 presentations. The first one is going to be on marine debris and some upcoming projects at marinas. And that is going to be by Greg Kleinheinz and Carmen Thiel from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Then we will hear about SPCC regulations for marinas from Ellen Riley from EPA Region 5. And then we will hear from Julia Nordyke. She will be providing an overview of green infrastructure. And then Eric Thomas from Barker's Island is going to be talking about some new innovative green infrastructure practices that were installed at his marina. And then we'll end with some questions and do a wrap up. Okay, so now we're going to hear from Eric Thomas, who is the chair of the WMA. So Eric, if you want to unmute yourself and provide us with a welcome. Thank you.
All right, so I have unmuted and the host needs to turn on my video. All right, here we go. Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon it now is. My name is Eric Thomas. I'm the new chair this spring of the Wisconsin Marine Association. And what we are is an organization of marinas, marine companies, suppliers, and vendors who do business in Wisconsin or have interests in Wisconsin. And the group of us work together to cover topics and network on things that matter to all of us who mess around in the water. And whether we're Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, the Western rivers, or the inland lakes of Wisconsin, many of us face very similar challenges in our businesses, whether they be environmental, regulatory, and as well as marketing the state and keeping our clients happy. So the organization has been a big supporter of the Clean Marina program and has hosted many events with it. And we see that as just an excellent way to help everybody raise the bar as far as keeping our waterways clean and our clients engaged and happy with treating the water well. So that's who we are. And I would like to welcome everybody and thank you all those who organized this event. So back to the water.
Well, thank you, Eric, for that. And thanks to the WMA for all of their support. So I am just going to be providing an overview of the Clean Marina Program. So what is the Clean Marina Program? Well, the Clean Marina Program, it's a voluntary certification program that prevents boating pollution and improves water quality through the implementation of best management practices, which we refer to as BMPs. So the Clean Marina program promotes clean and safe waterways for Wisconsin's marine industry and for boaters. So the Clean Marina program, we offer guidance and technical assistance on these BMPs to prevent or reduce pollution and help protect the water resources that are so essential to the boating industry. So the Clean Marina program, we are not a regulatory body, but we really help bridge that regulatory gap between the DNR and other agencies and the industry. And in addition, the Clean Marina program recognizes those marinas who are meeting these BMPs and for their environmental stewardship. So why become a Wisconsin Clean Marina? Well, the top reasons for becoming certified is one, clean lakes and rivers are good for business. Boaters really care about their water resources. In addition, becoming a clean marina creates a safer and healthier place to work and to recreate. And also becoming a clean marina enhances your image among boaters and your community. So the majority of our certified clean marinas say that certification improved the image of their marina, particularly from the boating community. And in addition, becoming a clean marina helps prevent pollution and the spread of aquatic invasive species. So why should we care? Well, since marinas are located right on the water, they act as a final defense before water and pollution enters lakes and rivers. So there's just a lot of opportunities to really make an impact through the implementation of BMPs. Okay, so next I'd like to recognize our Clean Marina technical team. So we really couldn't do what we do without them. So the Clean Marina technical team provides guidance and technical assistance. They also assist with our site visits, and they approve all of the certifications and recertifications. So I really want to thank everyone who's on this list. Okay, so this is a current map of our 2021 participating pledged and certified clean marinas. So currently we have 22 certified clean marinas and they are in blue, and we have 21 pledged facilities. And we're really working on continuing to grow the program. Okay, so I just kind of want to briefly go through the steps to becoming a certified clean marina. We have some, new policies that we've enacted over the last year or two. So I just kind of want to stress some of those as well. So the first step is to contact the coordinator, which is myself, and then to sign a pledge. So by signing a pledge, that really starts the process. We don't have any sort of time requirement to becoming certified. So you can work through the steps and implementing best management practices at your own pace. So then you would do a self-evaluation using the Clean Marina checklist. So this checklist can be found on our website. And then once you kind of go through the checklist, then we recommend scheduling a preliminary visit. So this can be an in-person visit, this could be a virtual visit, or it could be a phone call. So we would go through the checklist together. And then if it was in person, we would walk around your facility and kind of see which BMPs you're already meeting and which ones you still need to work on. So if this is your first time going through certification, we really would really stress the importance of this preliminary visit. If you're going through recertification, this step really isn't necessary unless you would like me to come out. So then next you would incorporate any of the BMP recommendations. And once you feel that you're meeting all of the requirements for certification, you would schedule your final site visit. So it's important to note that this final site visit needs to occur during the boating season, which is typically May through October. It's really important that we see these practices in place. And then that final site visit would be done by myself and then 1 to 2 tech team members as well. So once we complete the final site visit, then the tech team would approve the certification or recertification, and then we would say welcome aboard. And then you would get to enjoy the certification amenities, which is the Clean Marina sign, which you can see in the picture, as well as a Clean Marina frame certificate, We provide you with a small Burgee flag, window clings for your doors and windows, as well as the use of our logo. We also put out a press release and then announce the certification on our social media, which is Facebook and Instagram. So recertification is good, or certification is good for 5 years, and then you would need to go through the recertification process. So something that we've started about a year ago is that halfway through your certification term, I'll send you a midterm affirmation form that you would need to fill out and sign. And this just affirms that you are meeting all of the program requirements. And then it would inform us of any new practices and any new staff you may have as well. Okay, so now I'd like to announce our new recertifications and certifications for 2021. So we had 7 marinas that got recertified, and those are Apostle Islands Marina in Bayfield and Bayfield City Dock. I want to say congratulations to Harbor Club Marina in Sturgeon Bay, as well as Pikes Bay Marina in Bayfield, the Racine Yacht Club, South Bay Marina in Green Bay, and as well as congratulations to Washburn. So Barker's Island Marina, they are a new certification this year. So we are really glad to have them as a certified clean marina. So I really want to say congratulations to all of these facilities on their hard work and their dedication to the Clean Marina program. So I'd also like to recognize, we had 4 new pledges this year, which was just a really great addition to our program. So Kewaunee Marina was a new pledge, and they were also selected for the second Fun for Lake Michigan grant that we've received. And we were working with a consultant to come up with conceptual design and then eventually installation for a boat wash station, as well as some new stormwater improvements at their boat launch. And then Skipper Bugs pledged 3 new marinas, including an inland facility. So it's Madison Marina, Oshkosh Marina, and the Milwaukee Dry Stack Marina. So welcome to the program for all of our new pledges. Okay, so I'd just like to provide some program updates and some other next steps that we'll be working on. So I really just kind of wanted to highlight our Clean Marina website. So this website was launched about a year ago, and if you haven't looked at it yet, I really encourage everyone to visit it. There's just a lot of really good information on the program, why and how to become certified. You can find the pledge form if you're not yet a pledged marina. We have some great BMP videos, as well as a lot of resources under our resources tab. So there's the guidebook, an electronic version of the guidebook, as well as the most recent version of our checklist. And then we have several sample plans and templates. So if you're in the process of like updating your stormwater plan or your emergency response plan, we have some great templates that are really good resources. And we also have some boater education materials, such as our Clean Marina tip sheets and rat cards. And then all of our press releases are also found on our website as well. So we are also going to be continuing to update our Clean Marina guidebook. So the last update was about 10 years ago. So our goal for 2022 is to have a new updated version of our guidebook. We're also going to be continuing to work on our Clean Boater initiative. So in the past year, we've also been developing this Marina resiliency tool. This was part of a grant. So this is a self-assessment tool for marinas to see how prepared they are for coastal hazards. So this will be available this upcoming spring, and it will be on our website as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the second Fun for Lake Michigan grant, and this is for installing practices at marinas. So this is going to be done at 2 sites, and the first site that was selected was Kewaunee, but we are still looking for a second site to install a boat wash station. So please reach out to me if your facility is in need of improvements to their boat wash station. So, and then in addition, we are working on continuing to grow our program. So increase the number of pledges and certifications. And then we're really working on promoting our clean marinas and the program. Okay, well, so thank you. If you have any questions, you can either raise your hand or put them into the chat, and I can answer any questions that you may have. Okay. Okay, so any questions? So if you think of any questions, we'll also have a chance at the end. So I am gonna stop sharing my screen and we'll be hearing from our next presenters. So we have Greg Kleinheinz and Carmen. I'll make them both co-hosts. So if Greg or Carmen would like to share your screen.
Yeah, good afternoon, right? Yeah, it's afternoon.
Yeah, I'll just do a brief introduction. So if you wanted to get your presentation up.
Can everyone see that?
We can see your screen. There we go. So I'd like to welcome Greg and Carmen. So Greg Kleinheinz is the Weissman Chair of Sustainable Technology and the Director of the Environmental Research and Innovation Center at UW-Oshkosh. He has a degree in biology and chemistry and a PhD from Michigan Tech. So Greg has led over $20 million in research on the Great Lakes, and he is the principal investigator for the new US EPA trash cleanup efforts in Wisconsin. He is the investigator on a NOAA marine debris project, as well as on a coastal management project. So Carmen is the lab manager at the Environmental Research and Innovation Center at UW-Oshkosh. She has worked on water issues for the past 10 years as a degree in water resources, and she has been responsible for the Manitowoc and Kewaunee County beach teams and has managed numerous Great Lakes projects. And she is also the co-investigator on the US EPA, NOAA, and Wisconsin coastal management projects related to marine debris. So welcome, Carmen and Greg.
Thanks, Teresa. I really appreciate you being here, and I've only got 94 slides to go before I'm done. So no, I'm just kidding. So yeah, it's great to be here to talk trash. Not something that sounds very scientific, to those of us in academics, but this is becoming more and more of an issue. And so just kind of briefly to take a step back, I mean, these are things that I'm sure you're all familiar with in one way or another, but I get people that ask me a lot, like, well, you're working on the Great Lakes, and why do you call it marine debris? But that's really the sort of well-established term for it. EPA calls it trash. So we just call marine debris anything, whether it's actually marine water or Great Lakes water, since they're all considered coastal. It's really any disposed of or abandoned material in the Great Lakes. And so where does it come from? I mean, here's some interesting statistics. So, land-based, a little bit less than half of it. And a lot of that in the places that we deal with. Our group deals largely with the Door County area, so northeast Wisconsin, from kind of, a little north of Green Bay, around the peninsula down to Manitowoc. Our lab at UW-Oshkosh is actually right on the Fox River, so we have a dock and boat and things here as well. And we've done a significant amount of work on Lake Superior as well. So a little bit of exposure everywhere, but we certainly noticed that litter that gets generated inland washes or blows, for example, in the water. In marinas, as you all know, there's things that fall off of boats or, are accidentally, discarded improperly. So, and then just sort of, anywhere, sort of miscellaneous. And here's some, kind of pictures of the what I'd say are the usual suspects. I'm not sure balloons, but, we've been to beaches that have a wide variety of what do you want to say, reproductive preventive devices all over the place. So we see everything. In fact, one of our projects has been beach grooming to remove this material using a mechanical groomer on the shores. And so, but we also recognize that plastics don't all just end up on the shore, right? So some are more dense than water, so they sink or are in the water column and move around in various ways. Some are lighter. So they're subject to wind and wave action more so. And so this just gives you an idea of the types of plastic, whether, or PVC or polystyrene or polyethylene, where they might fall on that density scale. And so anything, over, here's seawater, a little over 1, but anything in this area up here, hopefully you can see that. Those are the things we see floating. But then a lot of these other materials, even though they're more dense, they don't just sink right to the bottom. They're usually floating in some way. All this bulk plastic then turns, or not all of it, but a lot of it will turn into what we call secondary microplastics. And so we have primary microplastics, things like beads and others, emulsifiers that were put into, home care products. But then a lot of these larger things turn into secondary microplastics. So things that, break down photochemically, physically, and, freeze thaw. And then these are then present in not very visible ways. It's not a water bottle floating. It's something else. And there's also some other places that we don't always think of it. For example, a nice fleece jacket like this might be made from 22-liter bottles, right? And everybody says, "Oh, look at the great way of recycling that." Well, which is all true. But it also sheds a tremendous amount of sort of fibers. So these sort of small microplastic pieces, and anything that's really 5 millimeters or smaller is considered micro. And those things end up in the water. And so people will say, "Well, okay, that's really interesting. Why should I care about it?" The funny thing is, these things have been turning up in other things. So Miller Beer found them in their source water in Milwaukee. Drinking water companies that bottle water have had problems. Sea fish or mussels and other sorts of food sources. In fact, we've even found it in human feces. So once you look enough, you can never look in enough feces. So then we've got fish and macroinvertebrates and things. And so long story short, it's an emerging issue. And you can kind of go on and on and on about what these microplastics may or may not do. And a lot of it we don't really completely understand. We understand they're aesthetically not pleasing. These are plastic, completely synthetic materials that things including humans are ingesting, so it's probably not a good thing, but we really don't understand completely what happens. But we started last year really looking into this, or over the last couple of years. But in 2019, Adopt a Beach found out that 90% of the beaches, or 90% of the material they're picking up was plastic, at least partially or fully. And it's been estimated 22 million pounds of plastic is deposited in the Great Lakes each year. And I found that number astounding when I first heard it, because, we've all seen those large gyres of, plastic in the news, floating around the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean. But when you talk 22 million pounds every year, that's a big number for the Great Lakes. And so, I think hopefully we're not at risk of looking that way as well. And in our particular case, we've got Door County, which serves as both a physical barrier for trash and debris from the western side, but also from the eastern side along the main lake. And so as far as the things that we're doing, these are some sort of significant projects. As Teresa said, we're starting an EPA project. I mean, we've officially started it, but really the field season will start next year. And that includes buying a trash boat, purchasing some sea bins for installations at marinas, and I'll show you a little bit more about those in just a second. Characterization of that debris, so what is it? It's not just a matter of finding things and putting numbers to it, but what is it? And then holding some public meetings and doing outreach and education. As part of a NOAA program with Great Lakes trash groups around the Great Lakes, we'll also be doing some additional sea bin installations and characterizing debris recovered from marinas at those sea bins. Again, what is it? Can we trace where it came from? And the goal is then to provide additional education and resources for those areas and the people using them to help prevent the input of the material. And the Wisconsin Coastal Management Project that we're working on has been working to identify all the public access points in the Door Peninsula in Northeast Wisconsin. And then the assessment of what's there in terms of trash receptacles, what's missing, what opportunities exist there, or what barriers are there to that. Because we found literally hundreds where people, they don't always go to the public beach. They go to the end of a road and, have a picnic and bring their friends and all that kind of stuff. And then also, in terms of just other work that we've done or are doing related to microplastics, again, fate and transport and distribution. We have a boat decontamination unit, trailer mounted unit that we are kind of actively looking for a new location for it. Various AIS projects, and then a bunch of outreach and education. We have 3 people in our group here that are familiar with water resources and marine debris, and so that's kind of something that we all take really seriously. These are some partners in our projects coming up right now. So Egg Harbor Marina, South Bay Marina, Manitowoc Marina, Village of Egg Harbor. And then our coastal partners, that are funding this, the Marine Debris Program. Teresa and her group have been great in terms of doing introductions. And so, as you'll see on my last slide, we're always looking for additional partners that have some interest in the things that we're doing, and hopefully we can find ways to help them as well. This just shows you some of the project areas. Our trash boat will actually be, will be operating in Sturgeon Bay. So we have a lab in Sturgeon Bay. We will actually kind of use it to, I guess, patrol the bay for trash. It'll then be, I'm having some technical difficulties. It'll then be trailered down to Kewaunee and Manitowoc to, again, on a regular basis, kind of, I guess, if you will, patrol the marinas and the harbors in that area, grabbing debris, and then also the South Shore Marina at the mouth of the Fox River in that area. And so in those areas, we'll be doing the C-bin installation and characterizing the waste. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. But then also the trash boat will kind of make this circuit as well. We've never done this before. This is kind of new for Wisconsin, so we'll see how it works. We really have no idea how much we're going to collect. So things, may get modified as we go forward, or we may add locations, etc. This was just our starting point. This is kind of what the boat looks like. It'll be similar to this anyway. So it'll be, kind of a pontoon style with there's actually a basket in the bottom, so you can just drive over things. You can pick things up and set it on the deck. There's a little crane that'll offload anything heavy. We also have some funds for either this is called a brute bin, or they've just come out with a radio controlled, basically it's an ROV, kind of like one of those automatic lawnmowers. And it would go around through your marina, kind of picking up trash, and you can just kind of drive it from the dock. We really would like to trade in a couple of these passive units like this for one of those, but they just came out, so we're kind of working on that. But the hope would be then again that could go on sort of a circuit and visit various marinas and places that we identify as having some accumulation, and hopefully help those places pick that up. This is what a C-bin looks like if you haven't seen one. Different installations. So on a floating dock, sort of this mobile, movable one, and then a fixed one on a permanent dock. But essentially, they're a pool skimmer that skims out. You can see some debris and things being put into the C-bin. They also have a pad in them that will absorb, oils and greases that are floating. So that helps a little bit with that as well. And they can remove up to 20 kilograms of debris a day, or as much as you open it. So it's a fairly significant amount. Each one of these has the capacity to remove. And for us, we have either our partners at the marinas will be emptying these, or our students. We have a group of students that work from basically May through the end of August on a circuit around Northeast Wisconsin, and they'll be emptying these as they kind of go by for further characterization. We're also deploying fishing line recycling. So we've made a bunch of these. They look exactly like this, in fact. So we're hopefully going to deploy these around, again, marinas, boat launches, places that don't have them. And, you know, if somebody's interested in one of those, please reach out to me and we'll see what we can do. You know, I would love to say I could give everyone one, but I have no idea what the demand would be if I say that. So, but we do have a bunch that we don't have homes for, and they can be mounted to anything. And again, either the local manager of the site or facility or park or launch or marina can empty these. They have a little screw at the bottom of them, so you just unscrew the bottom and kind of push the material out. Or if they're on our regular beach route, we'll have the students that are doing the beach monitoring and other things along the shore kind of clean those out. Again, basically Memorial Day through Labor Day. And once we find the material, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at macro and micro plastics. You know, what is or isn't present there. You know, where is it found? What can be done? You know, what's the source of it and what can be done to prevent it, which will lead us to our outreach and education and really this sort of three-pronged approach, you know, sort of doing education with, you know, water users, whether they're boaters or whatever, you know, promoting events to, you know, clean up things, sort of like Adopt a Highway, you know, the Adopt a Beach. And then what kind of research do we need on, you know, what impacts are these having? And our goal, you know, is I'm a Wisconsin guy, born and raised, and did all my schooling in Michigan. So, you know, I have a real interest in the upper Great Lakes and keeping those waters clean and making sure this doesn't turn out to be some shoreline in Wisconsin or Michigan. And so with that, I'll just say, you know, we're always looking for partners, and you know, if we can find a way to you know, help any of you and you're interested in participating in projects, we're always interested in having a conversation. You know, and again, and ultimately the goal here is to help further plastic and debris research and prevention on the Great Lakes. And so with that, I will say thank you. I think I went about 15 minutes, and take any questions that somebody might have. This whole group is like college students. It's like deer in headlights and radio silence.
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Those skimmers, and maybe I missed it. Where might something like that be available?
So if somebody, I can put you in contact with the distributor. In fact, they just went through a change. So Seabin was distributed out of Florida, and they've just been bought out or went out of business. And now it's a company actually in Ontario, Canada, that's doing it. But if somebody, I think I can put, I'll put my email in the chat. And if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to put you in contact with them. I mean, I can tell you what I know. You know, the cost, depending on the type you get, is, you know, is I just say a little less or a little more than $6,000. They run on 120 volts. They use fairly small amounts of energy. That's the only real requirement, that you have some, you know, power available to them. And then they come, like I said, in different configurations, you know, whether it's, you know, permanent dock or floating dock.
Thank you.
Question for you on the Seabins. How do they do with like floating algae that sometimes shows up in a marina? Does that clog them up and shut them down, or do they kind of muscle through it, or just require a little more frequent cleaning?
Yeah, it's the frequent cleaning. So, I mean, I guess at some point they might, you know, it could, you know, it would essentially plug up the basket, which would make there be no filtration going on. But typically what we've been told, again, you know, this is the first, as far as I know, in Wisconsin, but there are marinas in Florida that have, you know, 6, 7, 8 of these. You know, they kind of identify dead spots in the marinas. And what we were told by a couple operators are that when they first put them in, they were emptying them quite often. and it was you know, something that they would do almost every day. It didn't take long, but it was just something they had to put on their workflow. And as the units were in place for longer and longer, the frequency between cleanings became less and less. And it was twofold. One is there was a backlog of floating both debris, you know, plastic waste debris, trash, and then floating macrophytes or you know, seaweeds of different types. And then once, you know, they sort of caught up with that, there was always this steady amount of it, but they just sort of adjusted the amount of time that they emptied it. But we'll find out after the summer. At least the Cladopher is not as bad as it was, you know, 10 years ago. So hopefully that'll bode well for their operation.
Thank you. Just one more question. Do you find that the prevailing winds in Green Bay and Lake Michigan push more of the plastic debris to, I would say, the eastern shores?
Yeah, so the western side of Door County, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so we do. I don't have any hard data for that. We've been doing the beach work in the county for 20 years. And there are places, you know, a lot of the beaches, if you think about it, are pretty sheltered, you know, Egg Harbor, Ephraim, Fish Creek. So they're embayed already. And so there's some natural protection to that. But then when you get out into the open water and you start finding some of the locations, I mean, Washington Island Beach is what's behind me. But, you know, things like Murphy Park and when you get south of Egg Harbor, you do find more things anecdotally. That's one thing we hope to identify, because we know in Michigan, there's a number of places in the Traverse City area that say that they find a tremendous amount of material. But, you know, of course, it's always Wisconsin's fault, that are coming from Wisconsin, and the prevailing winds are just pushing that floating material over toward the Michigan shore. But hopefully our work will give us a little bit better idea, because when they remove the trash from the boats or the shorelines, they're going to quantify not only the amount but the types. So we'll, you know, instead of me just saying, well, anecdotally, hopefully we'll have some, you know, idea. And, you know, if there's people that identify places along the shoreline, there's always, you know, whether there's some sort of jetty or some other sort of longshore current impediment. If there's places that people are aware of that are collecting a significant amount of debris, we would love to hear that, because we probably send somebody out to collect some of that, you know, whether it's with nets or however, just to kind of get an idea of, you know, again, is that happening more than we see at the places that we're visiting?
Greg, do you have some tips for marinas about trash or litter prevention? I'm thinking about, you know, some of the items that typically get overboard: cigarette butts, water bottles.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I do. And one of the things that we hope to do is put together some fact sheet or help with develop some signage that, you know, people could just take and put in. I mean, in fact, it was kind of interesting. We didn't know it at the time, but last summer we rent places in Door County to house our staff and our students. And last year we had enough projects going on. We needed a second place. We actually rented a floating, well, they call it a floating cottage, but it's essentially a pontoon boat with a little shed on the top of it, at one of the local marinas. And it was kind of a great place to stay. But in doing that, you got kind of familiarized yourself more with the boating culture. So I know, working at the University of Wisconsin, you know, I don't have one of the big super yachts that pulls into Sturgeon Bay and float, you know, but it was exactly what Vicky just said. I mean, people, if there aren't places to throw things, you know, sometimes people, you know, some will just throw it overboard. I mean, I saw people flick cigarette butts, but, you know, a lot of it is people just set it down, you know, oh, I'll get it later. Things blow away, and that can be water bottles, you know, beer cans, whatever. And so, you know, having proper places and enough of them to dispose of material is important. And, you know, while we were staying there, we actually asked a number of boaters, you know, that use the marinas on a regular basis. just kind of what they thought. And that was one of the big takeaways where they said, well, listen, I don't really, most of them anyway, I don't really throw anything in the water on purpose, but I do know that I got done having a beer and I set the can down, and next thing I know, it was gone when I came back, and I really have no idea where it went. So, we all know probably where it went, but it wasn't because they wanted to do that. It was more just convenience, right? So some of it's on their own vessels. They need to have the containers and the places to put it, but some of it's at the marinas as well. Making it as easy. People, I think, inherently are lazy. So, they won't walk as far as maybe they should to get rid of some things. So making it easy for them helps. The fishing line recycling was one other one that has come up a number of times where people said, well, I just don't have anywhere to put the fishing line. So I throw it down by the trash can, or, I set it on shore or something else. And there really just wasn't anything available to them. And it's really it's a tough thing, because the more receptacles you put out, more options you give people to recycle and dispose of garbage in a proper way, then that requires more work on whether it's marina, boat landing manager, whoever, to empty those things. So, what's the right balance? I don't know. But I hopefully, as we all kind of try to work together in this, we can try to identify, the more problematic spots. And then, like I said, in our case, if we have a group that's driving right past there anyway, there's no reason they can't stop for 5 minutes and empty something and bring it to a place. And if that is the difference for municipality or marina, adding a few disposal sites, then, that's great. Then that works well. And we're kind of all helping each other. But yeah, I think it's really just recognizing human behavior, doing some outreach and education with people about where these things end up. And I'll be honest, a couple people said, well, whatever, a bottle just floats, it blows off my boat and then it floats up on shore and somebody picks it up. Well, yeah, that might be true. But in fact, they were out salmon fishing, and I said, well, the bottle that blew off somebody's boat 5 years ago might be in literally 10 million pieces in that fish you just caught. They're like, what do you mean? And I said, I sort of explained how this all went down. And at first the guy's like, come on. And I said, no, this is, I'm not saying that, you're going to die from eating your fish, but those bottles don't all just float up on somebody's shore to be picked up. They do break down into small pieces that disappear. And then they're really hard to, picking up a bottle is easy. Now getting all those microplastics out of the food chain, that's another problem. So they're just different. So outreach and education, and then recognizing human behavior and making it as easy for people to do what they really want to do anyway.
Thank you.
Somebody put a note in the chat, every 10 to 12 steps to be effective. I don't know how realistic that is.
There's research that they've done, like Walt Disney did to reduce, and then also there's a Canadian study that says if you want to reduce your trash by like 90%, then you should have, people really don't, Canadians are only willing to walk about 12 steps to a trash can before giving up.
Americans are probably only 6 or 8 steps then.
I do think that is correct, because that's the stat I was looking for that I had heard.
Does anybody else have any more questions for Greg or for Carmen?
Well, if not, I really, again, appreciate the time today, and my email's there, or Teresa or Todd or whoever have our contact. So we'd love to hear from you guys, and stop out this summer. So best of luck overwintering, and have a great holiday season, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Now I think Teresa we might have a little bit of technology issues on this end, and I'd like to introduce the next speaker. And as I do that, Ellen, would you like to see? We'll need to share your screen. Are you able to share your screen?
Todd, this is Monica Schoenst. I'm actually going to be sharing my screen. Ellen will be speaking, but I'm going to be sharing my screen.
Okay, sounds great. That works out well. Are you able to access it?
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, try that now.
It's saying the same thing.
Okay. Julie, do you mind on your end? Would you be able to give permission to Monica to share her screen? And then I just received Ellen's bio. So appreciate, thank you again, Greg and Carmen and UW Oshkosh for the presentation on the marine debris work that you guys are undertaking. The next presenter will be talking about SPCC Marina Outreach, and Ellen Riley is with US EPA's Region 5 Chemical Emergency Prevention Preparedness Section. And Ellen Riley joined the Environmental Protection Agency after 20 years in the private industry, including 10 years as the President General Manager of an environmental services company. And during her private sector career, she was a member of the Executive Committee on Environmental Energy Issues for a large Chicago area Chamber of Commerce. Ellen is currently an enforcement officer and inspector, again, with EPA Region 5 Chicago Oil Program. Let's see.
Todd, I'm not able to do that. So, but you have access to the PowerPoint, is that correct?
Yeah, I do. Ellen and Monica, if it's okay, I have the PowerPoint and I can share that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That
No
works.
worries, no worries whatsoever. That's why we have backups.
I'm glad you got the PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. And then I'll pull it up.
Yeah, I'm going to move just pretty quickly through this. So hopefully we'll be able to do this without too much.
Okay. And Ellen, Monica, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Just let me know when you need me to advance the slides.
Okay. We're going to do a brief, I have quite a few slides, but most of them are just going to kind of look at quickly. We're going to do a brief review of the rule as it applies to marinas and some of the provisions that are commonly applicable to marinas. And we want to emphasize that some of these are concerns that we've seen. There's some photos of some concerns we've seen during inspections. So you can go to slide 3 now. You can just go through this. Okay, now to 3. So this is just kind of where this regulation comes from, that it's a federal regulation that's found in the CFR, that it's mainly the main purpose of the regulation is to prevent oil to getting into waters. Okay, the next one. One of the things here that we want to emphasize is this is a federal regulation. Your state, Wisconsin, has some very good above ground storage tank regulations. This regulation is a federal regulation, and there's some things that are the same, some things that might be different. But at the end of the day, I think both of us are trying to prevent oil from reaching a waterway. Next slide. So this is one of the things where we're talking about the significance of marinas with the regulations. The distance to navigable waters is really important. The potential proximity to sensitive ecosystems, and then the amount of traffic. Next one. So this is just a chart to say what is applicable. And one of the questions is marinas are considered non-transportation facilities for our regulation, because that's one question where people do get confused whether it's a regulation that's under PHMSA or if it's under us or the Coast Guard. The next one. This is one of the things that is difficult too sometimes, is how do you determine the total oil storage? So we look at capacity of a container. We don't look at how much you store in the container. And we only look at containers greater than 55 gallons.
So the regulation, sometimes people will say, well, I have 4 drums, but I only can have 20 gallons in each drum. We have to look at all the drums and, you know, all 55 gallons. So it's tanks, drums, totes, anything like that. Next thing. The next slide, please. So this is just things of who needs to do a plan. One of the things we found a lot of times the marinas don't really realize they're regulated when we're out looking at it. And this just has a kind of a brief overview of some of the things that we'll be looking at further on. The next slide. These again, some more basics. One of the things is that you need to have a PE sign these very often. That's a common one. The next one. And this is again just some more things. One of the things that the plan has to be present and available for review at the facility if the facility is in operation more than 4 hours in a day. And the plan must be reviewed and evaluated at least every 5 years. And this has to be written and signed by the facility, whether or not it needs to be amended. Next one, please. Next one, please. I'm sorry. I'm making this hard on you. Again, this is just another thing on PE certification. So most plans need PE certification, but there are some facilities that don't, some of the smaller ones, and they're called qualified facility. The next one. So on the next slide, please. So here we're talking about what things would trigger a tier 1 or a tier 2, which are not necessarily a full PE certified plan. You can't have a single discharge greater than 1,000 gallons or 2 discharges exceeding 42 gallons in any year, and that you have less than 10,000 gallons at the facility, a storage capacity. A tier 2, a tier 1 is 5,000 gallons, and it has a lot of streamlined integrity testing and security inspections. Next one. And this is just kind of another just short telling you about the plan and how the tier 1 and the tier 2. The next one, please. So if you're eligible for a tier 1, there is an electronic version of the template is available on our website. And this really helps that you can look here and find the information. The next slide. The next slide shows the paperwork you can fill out. You can just really fill this out. It's even possible to do this handwritten if you have a small facility, so that doesn't require a PE certification. Next one, please. Okay, so for amendments, so this tells you when you have to amend the plan, and there's specific things. I won't go into too much of it, but if you have an above ground storage tank and you take it out of service, or if you put a new one in, those are considered major and they need a technical amendment, and they usually need to be signed by a professional engineer. So you have 6 months to do it, and if you do other amendments, you can do amendments. The changes that you do, but they don't have to be certified by a plan. You just have to put them in your yearly review. Next one. So here's some core SPCC concepts of things that we look for in a plan. Next one, please. So secondary containment. Now, secondary containment is one of the major issues that we find out, that you have to have minimum secondary containment, that you have to have sufficient containment for the most likely discharge. They can be passive or active. So, active containment would be a size secondary containment, certain berms, we'll show some other things. Passive would be using spill pads or absorbents or covering a storm drain prior to attic transfer. And a lot of these things are very specific to the kind of tanks you'd have at your facility. Next one, please. So here's an idea of general secondary containment. So there's a rollover berm. So that, that would be protective during transfer if you're transferring oil into a container. or into a truck or some other area for, so to keep the spill from not leaving the property. Next one, please. Size secondary containment is what you're going to see for, again, pretty much any storage container that's greater than 10,000 gallons. It's more stringent. It requires sufficient volume to contain the largest tank plus allowances for precipitation. So, you know, that you'd have to look at what kind of rainfall your area gets to decide how much the precipitation might be. You can use a dike structure, retention or drainage ponds, or other drainage systems. A lot of people use double wall tanks that are used for size secondary containment. And then there also is size secondary containment at loading and unloading racks, but we're not seeing a lot of racks at marinas at this point. Next one, please. Here's adequate containment here. This is a double wall marina fuel tank. One of the things is you do have to have some system in place that monitors the interstitial space. The next one, please. So here's an area where we have inadequate secondary containment. This is a tank that's sitting in there, but you see that the containment area does not have enough area for the whole tank plus precipitation. It just would catch any little minor spills, but it really doesn't meet the regulatory requirements. The next one, please. One of the other things, you know, that we have to worry about with containment is drum storage. Drums can't be just sitting on the ground. There has to be some containment for the volume of the largest container. So if it's a 55-gallon drum, you only need 55 gallons of containment, but your drums can't be sitting on the ground. They have to be in some kind of containment or in some area that can hold 55 gallons of oil if it were to spill. Next one, please. So this is one of the things now. So this area, when we go to look at sufficient containment, you would have to subtract anything that was sitting in there. So you would look and say, even if this were to hold the contents of this tank, which it doesn't appear to, you would have to subtract out the volume of any of these things that are in there. So this would affect your containment. So your containment area has to be clean of other things. Or when you do your calculation or you figure out your containment needs, you have to make sure if something else is going to be in that containment area with it, that it's subtracted out. Next one, please. So these are just some of the areas, some of the things that you find in a diked area. You restrain the drainage valves, pumps, you know, what kind of treatment systems do you use? And then your presence of oil, you know, and then your undiked areas, you want to make sure that in any area where it's not in containment, that it's designed that the drainage system will retain and return oil to the facility or to some other area so it doesn't leave the facility. Examples of that would be retention ponds, lagoons, catchment basements, or diversionary systems. Next one, please. So when we're looking at secondary containment, we want to look at all these things. One of the things that you see is cracks and discoloration that could affect the integrity of the containment, presence of spilled liquids, presence of debris, excessive vegetation. One of the things we see a lot is excessive vegetation that affects the capacity of the containment, and then holes or any kind of penetrations to the system by animals. Next one, please. So here's just a couple of examples of containments that are not sufficient. So you see that there's cracks in the containment, or the bricks aren't being held in correctly. So these areas are not considered sufficient containment. They're one of the things that we would write up if we were doing an inspection. Next one, please. So SPCC has a lot of record keeping requirements. You have to, as part of your SPCC, you have to have a written procedure of the test and inspections you're going to do. You have to maintain your records for at least 3 years, and they must be signed by an appropriate supervisor and inspector. So in your plan, you have to say that you actually have to say these records will be signed by an appropriate supervisor or an inspector. Next one, please. Integrity testing. This is one of the most common violations that people have or deficiencies they have to their plan. They have to be, storage containers have to be tested according to industry standards. And the person conducting the inspection has to be qualified. So it all depends on the kind of tank you have. So, I mean, those are one of the things where you have to do a little bit of research to say what regulation, what industry standard is covered by your plan in your tanks. And so the most common industry standard for marinas is the Steel Tank Institute's SP001. Now, this has been updated just recently, so it would be very useful for you to look at this and to see if any of this is applicable, but this is the most common standard that we see. Next one, please. So the marina has to do visual inspections. They have to set up a schedule of inspections. And according, that would be really looking at the industry standard too, to see how often they should be looking at these tanks. And then also how often, you know, your facility is bringing material in and out. And besides just looking at the tank, you have to look at the supports, the foundations. You have to look for the outside for deterioration, accumulation of oil. And there's, I just at the bottom, we're saying where you can find out the requirements for the piping testing. Next one, please. So here's a tank that's showing a lot of corrosion. So, you know, this tank obviously is not being maintained properly. You probably would make sure that it's following your industry standard for the inspection. Next one, please. So one of the other things now is overfill protection. So you have to follow good engineering practices. You have one of the following: a high level alarm, a high level pump cutoff, direct audible or code signal communication. Now this is the number one thing you see where someone says, you go and find out, is there enough room in the tank? And then you talk to the other person and you say, well, there's room for what we're going to put into the tank. And then they have to talk back and forth. So that has to be direct. It has to be handling at the time you're filling that tank, and that the people, you know, are recognizing that it's being done. That's one you see very often. And then, you know, your fast response systems for liquid level of containers with a person present to monitor. If you're using level sensing devices, then you have to follow the manufacturer's specifications for testing. The next one, please. So this is one of the things, I just left the singular on there. Visible oil discharges must be removed promptly. This is another thing where you see a lot of times people just leave it for weeks, and they say, well, it's not leaving there, but the regulation requires it. Next one, please. So here's some photos of where you see oil just sitting there. You know, the regulation requires that you remove this oil within a certain, you know, a fairly quick time. Next one, please. So facility security, you want to make sure that no one's getting unauthorized access to the oil handling areas to deter vandalism and promote safe operations. You know, you have certain lighting, and, you know, your drains got to be locked unless people that know what that are required are using it. Next one, please. Training. We have to train the oil handling personnel, and the one thing that we see that people aren't trained on when you're doing the training, we have training very often, at least once a year, but they're not trained on the plan. So it's more than just training them to respond. It's saying that you have an SPCC plan, this is what's in the plan, and I'm aware of it. That's one of the things we see a lot, because, you know, it'll be yearly training for employees for response to spills, but not necessarily knowing that they have a plan that they're supposed to be looking at. The next one, please. So this is one of the things too that's really important to our regulation, is reporting spills. So you must report an oil spill to the National Response Center. If the spill is to a waterway or adjoining shoreline, water quality standard could be violated. It causes a sheen or discoloration, or it causes a sludge or emulsion. The number one thing we see is usually a sheen. And so if a sheen is visible, this is where you call the NRC. That's who you report to. Next one, please. So the only time you have to report to EPA directly to the regional administrator is if you have more than 1,000 gallons in a single discharge, or if you have 242-gallon discharges within a 12-month period. So you must report that to the EPA within 60 days of the incident. So that would be a letter you would send to the regional administrator. Otherwise, if it's small spill, again, it goes to the NRC. Next one. So here's our guidance documents. One thing that EPA has is a very, very complete SPCC guidance document that's found in our website. Our website has a lot of information. So here's some documents that are in there. Almost any questions you have, you could find in these documents. They're really useful. Next one, please. So here's some contacts. Heather McInerney, one of my coworkers, she's very knowledgeable in the regulation. She usually gives these talks. I'm doing this for her today. Monica, who's also here today, she's our outreach coordinator. She's another person that can get you the information you need. And then Kim Churchill is our SPCC coordinator in Region 5. All three of these people are very good contact if you have questions. So I think we're done. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Monica, as well too. I'll leave the contact slide up if anyone wants to jot down the email addresses and phone numbers. I'm not sure if Teresa's back yet, but if there are any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Ellen and Monica, or you can also use the chat box as well too.
Yes, thank you so much, Ellen, and I'm back. So yeah, please either unmute yourself or use the chat box.
I have a question, Ellen, and I also have a comment. I would agree with you that in doing many of the marine inspections over the years, I have frequently seen oil that apparently had been standing within a secondary containment for a long period of time, maybe even years. And so I'm not really, as a technical team member, well voiced on or informed on how those can be handled on an immediate basis. Do they have to call in a hazardous waste collection unit, or can they use absorbents to soak up oil? How is this to be handled? I suppose it depends on the size and the nature of the leak.
Correct. And yeah, I mean, absorbents are fine as long as you're taking the absorbents and you're disposing them correctly. You know, I mean, it becomes a waste even when the oil's on the absorbent, and it may have to go through, you know, a special waste collector that handles oil, non-hazardous oil.
Frequently, it's around things like barrels and tanks that are used to collect used oil. And with regard to secondary containment, my second question is, if you're storing multiple barrels or containers of other sorts within a secondary containment, the size of that we know has to be at least able to handle the volume of the largest container. But if you have multiple containers, then what is the advice on that?
So you have to look at the area, and then you have to look if it's sitting flat on the container, you have to subtract that area from the volume. You have to subtract the area from the volume of your containment.
And then does the containment?
You wouldn't necessarily have to do the whole, like, you know, if it was 5 55-gallon drums, you wouldn't have to do all 5 times 55 for containment, but you'd have to say, like, is it 2 feet high? Is it taking 2 feet times 3 feet? And how much of that area is it taking, and include that in your calculation for containment.
So if you basically, the space that's left over after you subtract all the volume of the containers placed in there, the space that's left over has to handle at least the volume of the largest container within that.
Plus freeboard.
Plus, I'm sorry?
If it's outside, depending if it's inside or outside, you have to consider precipitation.
Oh, yes, right. Okay. but only 55 gallons if that's the largest container.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I thought I.
Yeah,
at
just
one
the
point
container
I-
just has to be the largest container, correct, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Hello, this is Eric Thomas with Barker's Island Marina. We recently went through the Clean Marina program, and as part of that had to get all our permitting and plans in order. And it became obvious that to us that we had been neglecting a number of our petroleum regulations, plans, permits. And it's interesting that, we get an annual inspection here in northwestern Wisconsin, and the inspector of the day, same gentleman for many, many years, was just giving us a quick visit and checking some boxes. And then we got a new inspector this year, and then Teresa helped shoo us along to get our ducks in a row. But it would be really good for Region 5 to reach out into Wisconsin and say, hey guys, why don't you educate these facilities? Because as I check in with other marinas, nobody's heard of these plans, these permits, these requirements, and nobody wants to be doing anything wrong. And the regs are there for a reason to help prevent accidents. But, we have a lot going on our plates already. We need to be nudged or reminded that some of this stuff's out there, and in pretty layman's terms, what we need to do. I would really encourage, EPA, who puts these documents together, to try to get them into the hands of the people who are out at the facilities.
And when you're talking these inspectors, I guess that's what we're trying to do here today, is to do some outreach. Monica's our outreach coordinator. I think it'd be useful if you give her some, when we're done today, maybe give her some ideas on people we should be reaching out to, because I think that's very useful. And I think that's one of the things we have found when we've done marina inspections, that very often as an industry, you're totally not always aware of what the regulation is. And that's certainly something we'd like to help you with.
Yeah, so if I can, I'm sorry. So if I can interrupt really quickly, this is Monica. So we actually just last year or the year before, we really started looking into marinas, because we realized that there was a lot of education that had to be had. And so we started working, we reached out, and Ohio Clean Marinas, actually, that's where we started doing some of this outreach and presentation and webinars. They actually asked us to be part of their webinars and conferences. And then I had sent out kind of a mass email to a lot of the other Clean Marina contacts in Region 5. And that's how I got with Teresa for us to present today. But I agree. I mean, I think, we're trying to get out there, and we're trying to get the word out, and to provide a lot of these marinas with information and tools so that they can be in compliance. And so if you have, ideas of how best to outreach to these marinas, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you, because we really would like to get the information. And today we kind of did just a broad overview, but there's obviously a lot more that's required in these SBCC plans and these programs that the facilities have to have. So, we're definitely open to doing more in-depth presentations on more specifics. We're looking for, for an avenue to kind of present, or, we want to make sure that there's an interest, and we need to have an idea of who best to contact in terms of presenting. So feel free to reach out to me, and we can work on developing some more outreach.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Dennis. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I may have missed something at the beginning, but you kept referring to everything as oil. I assume this includes diesel fuel and gasoline.
Yes, and that's a good question, because the definition of oil is very broad. It's almost any kind of petroleum product. And the other thing that is interesting about the regulation, it even includes, if you have a tank and it's just got a film of oil. So there's not like a minimum, a de minimis oil. It's if any oil is present, then that tank's considered an oil tank, or, you know, petroleum product is in a tank with something else. So if you have something contaminated with oil, that's considered oil also. Yeah, the regulation is very broad, and that's a good question. Because there's a lot of things, you know, vegetable oils and things that people don't think about as being oil are included, you know, denatured, I can't want to say the word, you know, ethanol, that's considered oil. So, I mean, yeah, so it can be different things. That's a good, very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. It's almost anything that would cause a sheen on the water.
Any other questions for Ellen on SBCC regulations?
Well, I just have a suggestion. Monica, you raised the point of outreach and the importance of this. I imagine that not all marina operators know the details of what you presented today, much less their staff. And yet those operators are required to, as you said, under an SBCC plan, they have to train their staff annually and make sure they understand the rules. Is there a way that maybe this presentation, or as you suggested, a more detailed presentation could be canned somewhat and then put up on our Clean Marina website or on the WMA website so that other marinas could hear what you just presented?
Sorry, I had
So
to
Monica-
figure out unmuting.
That's your question.
So yeah, I mean, we can definitely look into it. We do have some other SBCC presentations that are out there available. But you know, in terms of sharing the slides and stuff like that, we can definitely look into that and see if that can be done and how it can be done.
I do think there are some presentations on the website, aren't there, Monica? Although they're not marina specific, right?
Yes, yep, that is correct.
Okay, maybe there's some way that WMA could advertise that to marinas in Wisconsin. Anything I think that would help an operator be able to do adequate training would be useful.
Thanks, Vicki. That's a really good point. Any other questions?
Thank you, Teresa, for giving us the time to do this.
Well, thank you so much. This was really useful. So now I'd like to welcome our next two presenters. They're going to be presenting on green infrastructure practices at marinas. So I'd like to welcome Julia Nordijk. She's the Water Quality Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant, where she works with coastal communities on a variety of topics, including green infrastructure, clean marinas, and flooding. She's originally from Colorado. Julia moved to Wisconsin in 2013 and has since become enamored with the Great Lakes and is proud to call them home. So after Julia, we will hear from Eric Thomas. So he's the owner and manager of Barker's Island Marina. He's a lifelong sailor from a family of water enthusiasts and boaters. Eric studied geography and environmental studies at UW-Madison, and he has worked in the marina boatyard industry full-time for 30 years. Growing up on an island in the Detroit River and on the north shore of Lake Superior, Eric and his family now make their home on top of a hill in Duluth. So when he heads home, he can stop dealing with boats and their watery issues. So welcome, Julia and Eric.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thanks, Teresa, so much. Am I unmuted? Am I good? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Let's see, let's start this up. I'm going to try to keep my portion brief because this really is to let Eric talk a little bit about what's been going on at his marina over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, I guess, since we started this conversation. So we, as the Wisconsin Clean Marina program in 2019, we're part of what's the Great Lakes Clean Marina Network, which includes all the Great Lakes states. And sometimes we are able to come together and apply for a grant that actually can kind of distribute the money between the states, and then also really like leverage our network and our work with the clean marinas in each state. And so in 2019, we received a grant from the Great Lakes Protection Fund to work on stormwater management, specifically with marinas in the Great Lakes. As part of that, one of the primary mechanisms to help work on stormwater is trying to implement green infrastructure stormwater practices at marinas. And so many of you are familiar with these practices already. I think I presented on them last fall, but they are basically what makes it's your stormwater infrastructure. So typically marinas, you have gutters and you have storm drains and things like that, and your water typically just goes straight out of a pipe into the river or the lake. And green infrastructure tries to capture it where the water lands and then store it or filter it into the ground. So like in this picture, the storm water coming off of the parking lot is filtered into this bioswale. And what makes it green is that it's designed, an engineering design. These practices are typically engineered to mimic natural hydrological practices. So it's either infiltration or storage, and those plants uptake the water, and there's evapotranspiration involved in there too. So these practices can be really diverse. And so when we work with the marinas, we didn't know what kind of practices we were going to get into. So I was really fortunate to go visit with Eric in 2019. And so while that was the beginning of that project, this project has many, many partners who have all made this work really possible. And so we all have played different roles in working. So we have even people from the Ohio State University and the Ohio DNR, doing the engineering and site design and monitoring. The Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve, they've been helping with monitoring. The city of Superior, which the land is on, has been a really big partner in helping with construction and just the stormwater permitting in general. The Wisconsin Coastal Management and Sea Grant, myself, have really been helping with the coordination aspects across the board and with outreach. But I would say like our main partner that we could not have done this project obviously without Barker's Island Marina. And this is really the heart of the grant project, is really that public-private partnership in trying to help our marinas across the Great Lakes really try to improve stormwater management practices and kind of go above and beyond what might be required. So one of the outcomes of the project is also a Clean Marina stormwater toolkit that I encourage folks to go to and explore online.
Hey, Julia?
Yeah.
Were you going to try to share your presentation? Because we just have your background right now. Sorry.
It says I'm sharing, so let's see. Can you see it now?
No.
We're having because on my end it says I'm sharing my screen. So maybe we'll try that. Let's see. How's that?
Unless it's on my end, I just have you with your background.
Todd or Vicky? Is it just your?
I just see you in your background as well.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. And now?
Just
No.
you, Julia.
I'm sorry. Just give me. That's horrible. I don't want to be like that big in front of all your screens for the whole time. Let's see. Okay. I mean, I shared it earlier, right? When we were.
Yep. Yes.
Does anyone? I've never had this problem before. Okay, if you could give me screen sharing privileges. Teresa?
Julia. There we go.
When in doubt, just exit and start over, I guess. Okay.
Okay, looks good.
Okay, great. There's all the people that were involved. This is the Stormwater Toolkit. This is online. It has a lot of great resources. They have like a 3D visualization of different types of practices that they've done, like virtual reality, which is kind of neat. And then there's also like a matrix that kind of talks about the different types of great green infrastructure practices and that might work for your marina and like what maintenance is involved and what kind of locations they go in. So I encourage you to explore this. I mean, one of the reasons stormwater is really important at marinas is because I think Teresa mentioned, you're kind of on the last lines of defense. So many times, like a lot of the storm drains that are at a marina, literally it's just a very short pipe from wherever that storm drain is directly to the lake. There's no treatment in between. There's nothing catching most of what's going into the lake or the river. So there's a great opportunity to implement better practices, but also green infrastructure has like a ton of other benefits that really match marinas, like aesthetics. It can help with aesthetics. It can help with nuisance flooding issues in certain situations. It can provide, pollinator habitat and flowers and things like that. So in 2019, we started working with Eric at his marina. It's the largest marina on Lake Superior, if that's correct, I'm pretty sure. So it was really exciting. And we had to kind of figure out like where green infrastructure or stormwater improvements needed to be made, because these practices are really, really site specific to the marina. So we chose a location that's on the south end of their property and collects a lot of, and so this is what it was, the outline of it before. So this was typically a storage area before, and it's near the fuel dock, the maintenance building, the loading and haul out areas too. And so at some point, like all the water was really just going down into this like side ditch. It wasn't going anywhere. So this was a good location for that. And then the engineers came out and looked at exactly, they did survey work to like look at exactly where the water was coming from and how much that potential practice could actually capture. He's going to talk a lot about this practice, but we ended up selecting a constructed engineered wetland, or a stormwater wetland, basically. And it captures, I think it says, it captures 96,000 square feet of stormwater on their property. And the practice itself is about 9,000 square feet. And so that's kind of this. It has 2 cells. One of the challenges of being on the Lake Superior Marina is, the groundwater table was like right there. If you look down the storm drain that was originally there, the water was at the high water levels years was just like within an inch or 2. So you didn't have a lot of opportunities to infiltrate stormwater into the ground. So the wetland concept worked really well because it could be dynamic with different lake level changes. So this is what I'm going to just turn it over to Eric to let him talk about the whole process and the practice. And this is the before picture. So take it away, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. It was, some years ago, Julia and Teresa showed up at my door and said, we have money and we want to build green infrastructure. And I said, well, glad you came by right there. And I pointed to an area behind a grove of trees. And it was really the last bit of unmolested real estate on our leased property. We're a privately run business that leases a marina from the city of Superior. And we've leased the facility for 40 years since it opened in 1980. And the relationship with us and the city is very hands-off. We do our thing and pay rent. And occasionally we reach out to the city for infrastructure support. So this was an area that was sand and was not great for storing things because it was soft sand and it was often wet and spongy and led into a natural wetland into the left of this photograph. Next slide. Can you click over for me, Julia?
Yeah. I don't know what's going on. There we go. I think, sorry, delay.
Here we go. So this is what it became, and this is literally a photo of the day they finished. Ohio State University, as part of this Great Lakes grant, was doing design and engineering, and they surveyed the property and came up with the idea of this linear wetland. And what you see here in the foreground is the second of 3 quote cells. We've got to the right, you can just not really see it, but there's a waterfall. There you go. A waterfall of rock. And in this photo, you can see our above ground storage tank and the back of some boats. Well, that is where the water comes off of our paved areas. And the area there is a heavy industrial site. We're continuously running, forklifts and tractors and travel lifts, other oil laden equipment all day long, 6 days a week, most of the year. And it's just an area that I considered, it's really hard to keep clean when you're dealing with engines and boats. We typically haul or launch 1,000 boats a year. So we're dealing with a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of potential for nuisance spills, debris, plastics, just all the nasty stuff that comes off the street. And so the system is designed to, here's a photo after it grew up. This photo, the whole system was built this spring. This is a photo taken probably a month or 2 after it was planted, and the string keeps geese out. But this is our outflow here at the tail end of what are 3 basins and wetlands. The idea being that the water is cooled off, the water is filtered, the vegetation, which was all chosen specific for its tolerance to dry and wet cycles, really helped clean up our stormwater coming off the pavement, which literally before was a direct discharge to the harbor and then the lake. So this, we felt, really improved our footprint, you know, helping to keep the water clean. Initially, the first section of the site picks up the cigarette butts and the plastic debris that comes off the you know, off the facility pavement. And then after that, you know, things like RV antifreeze and all those things that get dumped in a marina, you know, on the hard, get dealt with and treated and absorbed as best they can before being introduced to the lake. This was our big point of green infrastructure, was that, you know, we're going to make a heavy impact on our entire property, but we're going to strive to control that impact at the outlets. You know, certainly good housekeeping along the way lowers your impact, but by having this engineered, you know, human-made wetland, we're doing our part, or doing the best we can. You can see here one of the rock berms that helps control water flow and stagger the flow, preventing, you know, high flow erosion in the site. We had a fuel tank overfill situation soon after this was completed, and these rock berms were an excellent place for us to put out absorbent boom, just in case, you know, we had a runoff situation from where our tank is. And our staff, you know that this is a great place. If there's an accident on shore, you fight it at that spot, but then you can also come and make sure at our outflow that we're not releasing anything onto the lake. Secondarily, the clients love it. They come back here because it's a quiet spot. There's a resident turtle that moved in soon after we completed the facility. And, you know, as a business owner and a steward of the lake, the clients really, really like to see these kinds of projects. And, you know, I've just felt that this spot of the marina, we've been kind of setting aside for not paving. And this was a great answer to not paving an area. Another big impact that we as a marina have on the waterways is the power washing of boats. And, you know, it's a seasonal thing. When they come out of the water in the fall, they're covered with slime and algae. And in our neck of the woods, any surface of a boat that's not painted with a toxin is covered in zebra mussels. So we're power washing 500 boats a year. And that, up until 2 years ago, was literally direct discharge back into the lake. It was, you know, the practices of most marinas are to wash them close to the water so the mess can get washed away easily. And that's a tough legacy to live up to, but that's what we were all doing. It bugged my staff that they were walking through 3 inches of muck to get to projects, and the muck stuck around for a long time. So what we did, after trying to figure out how to build a good wash basin and catch the algae, the slime, the bottom paint residue, that being mostly laden with copper or zinc, was to take a number of water samples when we were washing boats to figure out what we'd be sending downstream to our local water treatment facility. We had those tested. We got heavy metal contents. We calculated volumes so that we could speak intelligently to the water, the pre-treatment resource folks at the water treatment plant. And we had to do this for both our facility in Minnesota. And then we brought it and did it here at our facility in Wisconsin. So what you're seeing here looks like a wooden deck. It is. It's about 6 inches tall. It's rubber roofing membrane and geocloth felt laid down on the pavement, and then a deck set over it in 2-foot by 8-foot chunks. Takes us about 3 hours to assemble it with a forklift and two laborers. We put this up the 1st of September and we power wash over it. It then collects all the wash water that's coming off the boats and the slime and the muck. We then have plumbed it to our head pump system, or our marine sanitary device pumping system that's nearby on the fuel dock. And we were able to collect up all that wash water and get it into the sanitary sewer system. At the end of the haul out season, that would be last week up here or 2 weeks ago, we take up the decking, we roll up the the felt, the geocloth felt, and dispose of that to the landfill, which has got lots of muck and slime and zebra mussels. And then we can just roll up the rubber and use it again next year. So for us, this was a great solution to helping catch the wash water. For a number of years, we'd used layers of geocloth, felt, and put down a new piece each week to kind of collect the debris. But this really helped keep the whole area dry and clean. As part of the whole project with the engineered wetland, we repitched and regraded our facility to all drain into the new wetland. In this next slide, this was an existing, you might say this is the 1970s approach to dealing with a parking lot. Our main storage lot where we winter store boats, probably an area, several hundred car parking lot. In the 70s, they just built a pond at the base of it and the water ran into the pond. Our problem with this was that over time, this had filled in to some extent, and also it's directly tied to the lake level. And in high water years, the pond's volume wasn't enough to deal with the runoff from the lot, and we would get flooding, really bad flooding. Also, the system was just run off into the pond directly. And as part of the program, we had this gravel bank put in to create a forebay that gives us an area to easily clean the silt or debris that's coming into this pond. And then we did add an emergency outflow that's just visible there in the upper right, just a culvert into the harbor, so that we would still treat to some extent a major rainfall, but we would have an outlet to prevent flooding. And this was a great partnership project with the city and some of the grant money to kind of improve an existing structure and pond that was on the island and on our facility, but it had long been ignored. So, it was a relatively painless process to get these things put into place, these practices. These are kind of the big engineered things that you don't do on a daily basis and you don't do with a lot of thought. I did have to dedicate, a chunk of property at a marina on an island to do this. And you don't do that lightheartedly, because that property is very valuable in many ways. But we're proud of what we did and how we use it. You can see here the brown box in the middle near the fuel tank. That's a monitoring station that triggers each time we get a significant rainfall, and they can measure the water temperature, the flow, and the clarity. And then they have another one of those stations at the end of the pond system, the wetland system. And they're using that as an ongoing engineering study and funded through the state to see how well or what impact we're having on our outflow water. But you can see from the background of that photo that there's just a lot going on really close to the water. And we're glad to have this buffer between us and the lake. It was, things will happen. I've been in the industry long enough to know that they will always happen. So you're a fool to not prepare and build systems that can help protect the environment. I think that's what we've got, Julia. Any questions on kind of what we did there? It was we did the bigger projects that we could see, among all the other little things you do in a marina to keep the place clean and safe and compliant. This was a big one, but the wash station was, I think, a very big impact. And it wasn't hard to do, and it wasn't all that expensive. It took us years of scratching our head on how to deal with that wash water. But once we did, we were very pleased we weren't leaving a bright blue plume in the water anymore.
Well, thank you so much, Eric and Julia. So any questions, you can either unmute yourself or type them in the chat box.
Eric, I have a question about the sewage treatment plant and the pre-treatment monitoring that you did. Were there any issues with the treatment plant about accepting the wash water, the pad water?
They're pretty sketchy about stuff, but it's interesting. You start the phone call with, I've got some jugs of water I'd like to send down the sewer, but I'd like you to check them before I send them. And they were like, oh boy, we don't want any part of this, And so we had a private lab look at all the stuff we were going to send, and we calculated the volumes ourselves, and then went back to them and just had an open conversation and said, well, these are the materials, these are the volumes. And it's such a little volume compared to what they're dealing with, that our pre-treatment of a huge geocloth felt system, the metals we're dealing with, copper and zinc, are already in their system because of all the plumbing that we have, and our numbers fell well below what was going to be a problem. So after that, both Western Lake Superior Sanitary District in Minnesota and Environmental Services in Superior were like, just send it down the pipe. It's not going to be a problem.
That's good to know.
Any other questions for Eric and Julia?
Sounds like a really well thought out project.
It's the area that was developed and done was not that expensive to build. Julia can maybe chime in on what the number was just for the construction, but it was done in a matter of 2 weeks with one laborer and an excavator operator and some laser measuring equipment. And, it happened quickly and efficiently. So, it was a nice project.
Yes, I think I just had it up. I think that here we go. We do have like preliminary costs. So this, you have to keep in mind, this is quite a large system in general, but the construction, which also includes oversight and erosion control, which add some dollars, was around $71,000. And then the plantings were around $18,000. The stormwater pond improvements, I would note, was really inexpensive for some pretty good like cost benefit. It was only like $4,000, I think, to do the stormwater pond upgrades. So yes, I would say So those are some of the preliminary costs that came in, if anyone has any. And then there's also what's really important with these kind of practices, since there's plants, you need to build in a budget for, maintenance for. It's good practice to have at least 3 years. And the first year is very important to get the plants established. So in some of the sites around the Great Lakes, there were drought conditions, and so you have to have someone come water the plants to some degree so they can become established. In our case, we had geese like immediately. So, but hopefully now that they're bigger, we can take down all the string and the fencing, maybe. I don't know. So.
I would say that our local government was very excited about this because they love any project that leverages outside money with a little bit of their inside in neighborhood money. We used this project to facilitate our local government to repave our entire service area and regrade it and repitch it because of the high water issues we were having and flooding. They did that. We raised the travel lift well and did other improvements to kind of rescale the area. It'd been 40 years. It was time to look at where the water went and where we were using things. So some of these projects you could do any day, but others you got to do as part of a bigger reimagine. But there's a lot of grant money out there to do these, and it helps you leverage your locals. That's even better.
Yeah, and I would say the practices range in price really greatly. This was one of the higher ticket item ones because of the engineering and the construction and plants. But like rain barrels are probably one of the cheapest things you can do, or just even putting in a pollinator garden. Just like, which people love those things. It's like a lot of native flowers and plants, replacing some of your turf grass with some of those kind of things, which could reduce maintenance costs too. So it's a big scale. And I think it's really the key thing is working on your site and figuring out like what kind of practices fit your specific marina, and then what kind of meet your goals and what the ideals that you want for your marina too.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It's
Thanks,
been
Eric
good.
and Julia.
It's a major accomplishment.
Well, great. Well, thank you. So before we wrap up our workshop, I can take a time to answer any other questions you have on any of the other topics of today or anything else about the Clean Marina program. This is a good opportunity to ask. Okay, well, if there aren't any additional questions, I just want to thank everyone for participating in our fall Clean Marina workshop. And thank you to all of the presenters. These were some great topics. I hope everyone found them interesting and useful. And then again, I just want to acknowledge and thanks to everyone who's been supporting our program. Again, I'd like to mention that this workshop was recorded or is continuing to be recorded. It will be made available on our Clean Marina website. I will also send an email to all of you who have signed up for the workshop once it becomes available. And where the Clean Marina program, we are hoping to do some more workshops this spring with the same Zoom format. So again, feel free to reach out if there's any questions. And I really want to thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Teresa.
I'm going to stop the recording.